killing the host. The host is the economy. What constitutes the killing of the host? Is it a financial crash, or is that just like a symptom of the sickness of the host?
Well, the crash usually ends the parasitism because the crash brings down the parasite too. A smart parasite in nature wants to keep the host alive, until finally it's just about over, and that's when it lays the eggs, and the eggs will eat the host's body. The economics actually uses its vocabulary, uses the word host country. A host country to investors is a country that lets foreign investors buy its infrastructure or its companies in order to gain control of them. So the country will let an American or European company in, and the American affiliate will then borrow money from a U.S. bank or perhaps a consortium with European banks, and they'll borrow the money to invest, and they will essentially not pay taxes to the host country government because they'll pretend to borrow the money from a wholly owned affiliate offshore in a country that doesn't have any income tax. It could be Liberia, it can be Panama, a country that isn't a real state, that doesn't even have its own currency, which would pose a devaluation risk, but uses the U.S. dollar as its currency. So essentially, the government is starved for money, and the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank will encourage countries to develop exports that, for instance, plantation exports and tropical agricultural products that don't compete with American products, basically, not growing their own food. You'll have the IMF and the World Bank encouraging a debt profile that ends up where countries have to borrow more and more money to maintain their foreign exchange rate. And the IMF will subsidize a country going fastest to ruin, as Adam Smith would say. They'll keep lending the money as long as they follow policies that enrich American corporations in their countries or that help the kind of world specialization of labor that American economic strategists want to see in order to make America the indispensable nation, the only nation that can wreck other economies if the Americans decide to impose sanctions or go to war or finance regime change or political assassination, or do to them what it did in Guatemala in the 50s, in Iran in 1954, in Libya, and making sure that the world remains dependent on the United States. So the countries have to go further and further into debt. They have to borrow more and more money from bondholders, and you're seeing that in Argentina these days. Argentina, again and again, is ruled by probably the most right-wing oligarchy in Latin America. It may be the most right-wing oligarchy in the world for the last 100 years, certainly, even more so than Pinochet's Chile. And you're having it a basket case. The oligarchy basically taxes the economy as a whole so heavily that it really can't have its own industry. It can't have its own independent agriculture. And all the debt is borrowed in U.S. dollars to maintain the ability to repay the bondholders. Well, the Yankee bondholders that are being attacked all the time in the press are really Argentinians themselves that are operating offshore in the Dutch West Indies, in Panama, and other places, holding Argentina's foreign dollar bonds, pretending, oh yeah, these dollars are awful, but they're the American bondholders are afraid to buy Argentina's debt because they're understandably looking at the statistics like I did 50 years ago, 60 years ago, and seeing that, well, there's no way they can pay unless America lends to them. It's all just artificial bubble. So that's basically the countries are kept afloat until finally they're about to go under. And that's when the IMF will talk to the oligarchs and say, well, we can't really make any more loans to them. Move your money out now. We're going to lend enough money to Argentina or Chile or other countries to support the currency. Move your money out of local currency into dollars as quick as you can. And then we'll pull the plug and we'll let the currency collapse. And of course, then because we know that you're going to be voted out of power by a socialist group. And then they'll say, look at how the economy's collapsing. It can't pay the debts because we're not lending it any money. Like we only lend money to right-wing neo-fascist governments. And if you're not a fascist, you don't get the money. That's Janet Yellen's basic principle. If you don't have an oligarchy, you're not getting the money. If you try land reform, we'll do to you what we did to Guatemala. You don't get any money, you get regime change. But they squeeze them until finally people are so desperate they vote for a nutcase like Mr. Milei in Argentina, who will just say, well, to hell with it. Let's just adopt the U.S. dollar itself. Let's go back to using dollars, because then the wealthy people won't lose any money at all. For you people, the 99%, it doesn't matter because you don't have any savings anyway. But we want to dollarize so we don't even have to worry about foreign exchange rates. The country's completely a basket case. And as I mentioned, this goes back 100 years. Herman Kahn, my former boss at the Hudson Institute, used to give a point saying, the 1950s, the 1960s were really a great period, and yet there was a malaise back then. People didn't realize how good it was. He said one country realized how good it was. That was Argentina, because they weren't good. They weren't getting any of it. And in fact, way back in the 1910s, 1920s, in the 1910s, before World War I, everybody thought Argentina was going to end up the richest country in the world. It had everything: a great environment, rich land, herds of cattle, seemed to have everything. But it also had this truly parasitic ruling class. And it was fascist before there was fascism. And it's always had a stranglehold in Argentina. And Argentina is a case where there's no solution to the economic problem in the existing structure of the economy and society. It would require a Maoist revolution to clean out this oligarchy and somehow enable Argentina to use its land, its oil, its raw materials, its mineral rights, all for the economy at large, for the population at large. But it's not going to do it because the Americans funded a huge terrorism program in the wake of Pinochet in the 1970s, mass terrorism and mass murder of labor leaders, of progressive economists, of land reformers. And essentially, any attempt at progressive economic reform in Argentina is a death penalty. That, to answer your question, that's what happens when finally the parasite realizes it's got everything it can. Let the economy die, carve it up, and take what you can, and move your money out of Argentina into new countries, into Africa, into Asia, and repeat the process.